All right, number 2, I got, do you think depression is actually a mental illness or just a temporary condition that gets way overdiagnosed? In talking with clients, do you notice a big difference in how it affects men versus women?
This one got me kind of fired up. You want me to start on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, first of all, let's come up with an operational definition of depression. So when researchers look at animals and they're looking at depression in animals, the way they measure depression in animals is, does the animal slow down? So does it do less of the things that animal normally does? Sniffing, exploring, grooming, eating, humping, whatever, all the things that it does. When the animal starts to get smaller in its behaviors, we call that depressed. And I think that's not a bad way to think about depression in humans, that our behavioral repertoire shrinks a little bit, our world gets smaller, we get smaller. Now, for men in particular, it doesn't always look sad and slow and depressed. With men, depression can often look irritated and agitated and sort of energetic. But even then, you see a diminishment in functioning at work, in relationships, in the way they take care of themselves. So this idea that depression shrinks you down and makes you less than you could be and that you want to be, I think is a fair enough definition for the discussion. Would you go with that?
I think those are the most reliable signs of depression, the vegetative signs, I think is what they tend to call them. I also think that male depression tends to manifest itself as irritability or restlessness. I think that that's fair.
Which I'll just interject here that makes it hard to recognize, because if a guy's acting like kind of a dick, it's hard to recognize that he might actually be suffering. But go ahead.
Yeah, many angry men are actually very sad men.
Yeah.
And I think it's often easier for men to access anger, because on some level it gives them this deceptive sense of a more powerful experience. I mean, anger is like inflating. I think it's deceptive because when you actually give into the anger, you're surrendering your own locus of control, and whatever has succeeded in making you angry is now like the matador waving the cape, and you are potentially the charging bull, and that generally doesn't end up very well for the bull at the end of the match. Okay, so I think we agree on those definitions.
Okay. So the next point, I guess, would be that I think we have collectively, as a society, been duped into thinking about depression as a disease that you catch. It's even in the question. Is it just an illness or a temporary condition? So we talk about depression as if it is this thing you catch, like chlamydia. And it's largely through the efforts of, and they're not evil efforts necessarily, but through the efforts of pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, that we think of depression as a disease. But you and I know that depression can be secondary to any number of things. It can be secondary to physical problems like a thyroid problem or bad diet or lack of exercise. It can come from ongoing problems in your life. It can come from something that happened 30 years ago that you don't even think about anymore, but it's thinking about you and it's driving your behavior. So depression can come from all sorts of different situations, which makes it a symptom, not a disease. When you think about it as a symptom, like a fever can be caused by 1,000 different things, but a fever isn't a disease. A fever is just a symptom. And so if you frame it as a symptom rather than a disease, then you get a couple of options. And the first one is difficult. That is that this is a symptom of something going on, so you get to do the hard work of diagnosing it and then coming up with a treatment plan and then following through on that treatment plan. And that's a lot of work. And one of the things that really sucks about being depressed is that it sucks your energy. So you don't want to do these things that you could do under this first plan. The second plan is you take a pill. And in my 20 years of doing this work, it seems to me that family physicians in particular, wonderful people in general, but they hand out SSRIs like they're candy. And they don't talk about the trade-offs. Now, I'm not opposed to SSRIs. They're just a tool. But every tool has its trade-off. And every time I talk about the trade-offs of SSRIs, somebody gets deeply personally offended. So if you found SSRIs useful, good. Go with that. But physicians will hand this stuff out and they don't talk about the fact that there is no free lunch when it comes to neurochemistry. Every time you tinker with your brain chemistry, your brain adjusts. And so with SSRIs, the way your brain adjusts is by downregulating the synapses that are affected by the SSRI. And so you get a window. And in my experience, it's 6 months, 12 months, something like that, where the fever is reduced, got a little more energy, and the problem will either resolve or you get the energy to resolve it. You figure out what's going on. SSRIs can be lifesavers in that sense, that they take the edge off enough that they can get you moving. Or if that doesn't happen, then you're left, as that window closes, with doing what so many people do, which is switching to another medication, or you stay on the medication just to avoid the withdrawal of going off of the medication. And so some people have been on medications for years. It's not really doing anything because their brain long ago went back to baseline, but they're just avoiding that withdrawal. And so I'll close this out by saying depression is a symptom. You'll get a lot further thinking about it as a symptom than you will as a disease.
Yeah, I think that was all well said. Anybody who really wants to get into this issue in depth, I would recommend Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic, which was written maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it's a muckraking expose of the pharmaceutical industry's influence in the evolution of our conceptualization of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
About 100 years ago, depression was seen as more or less a temporary condition. One of the nasty secrets is that most of the illnesses that are populated in the DSM, including depression, tend to spontaneously remit, even in the absence of therapeutic treatment or pharmaceutical intervention, which basically means, I think, with depression, that the vast majority of depressions go away by themselves in 6 to 10 months. Now, it can be a very challenging, dark, difficult 6 to 10 months. And so potentially the SSRIs or other medications can elevate a person's mood and give them the energy and clarity to take constructive action during that window of time that you just discussed. But you're absolutely correct, is that changing your brain chemistry over time creates sometimes irreversible changes in your neuroanatomy and your neurophysiology. And that once the medication is discontinued, a syndrome that in many respects can mimic the initial problem reappears. And too often, according to Whitaker, this rebound depression gets misdiagnosed as the original depression returning, as opposed to, let's say, a withdrawal syndrome from the psychiatric medication.
Yeah.
And of course, in many cases, the individual then goes back on either that SSRI or an equivalent medication, and the problem is just sort of worsened over time. Now, I do agree that depression is largely a symptom, and it can be a symptom of many different things. The thing that I think depression is a symptom of in the vast majority of cases in men is it's a symptom of being low status. And I don't think you mentioned that. It's like, it's possible for a man to be confident and contented and happy and clear when he has no sexual optionality, when he has no money or a secure livelihood or a comfortable lifestyle. It's possible, but it's extremely difficult to be happy and contented and confident under those conditions. And I think that is the natural state of things when most young men enter into the world, is they're the lowest person on every totem pole.